go. And let me make sure that does go. Give it just a second there. Oh, did I make sure? Yeah, your screen's good. I hate the 15 to 20 second delay that YouTube has on this.
Yeah, okay.
There we go. I think we're good. Maybe it's loading. There we go. We are good. All right, cool. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another live podcast here. I'm super happy about today's guest. Today I have Lamont from Days of French and Swedish. Lamont, do you want to do just a small introduction or anything like that and let people know who you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Lamont. I have a channel called Days of French and Swedish. I'm Australian, if you haven't picked up on that from the accent. And on my channel, I talk about general kind of language learning things and do like app reviews and program reviews, like language learning program reviews. And basically, I talk about anything that I think I can make a good video about. And yeah, I speak French and Swedish to like reasonable levels. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, man. Thank you for jumping on. I'm hoping that I can carry some sort of interview remotely decently. I watched your interview with Matt versus Japan, and I even talked to Matt afterwards, and I said, of all the places that you've done interviews with lately, I said, that guy brought out the best, man. I said, he's the best. I said, he's the best interviewer. And he said, I think that's my favorite too, because you could tell that he knew what he was talking about, and he kind of dove in, you know. So hopefully this can, hold a torch to the interview standards. So
well, I certainly can't hold a torch to Matt, so I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Cool. So I do appreciate you jumping on. The time difference is a little bit crazy, but we made it work, and I appreciate that. And you did it on such short notice too, so I definitely appreciate that as well. So I want to get into obviously language learning and stuff. I want to get into where did your interest in general with languages start?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how far back you want to go in terms of like to anyone out observing from the outside, I became interested in languages 3.5 years ago, and it was very sudden. Although these things with me are actually not sudden, but that's how it would appear to people who don't actually live in my brain. But we'll start 3.5 years ago. I became interested in languages in general, but the way that played out was through getting interested in Swedish. And this sounds weird, and some people don't quite believe me when I tell them, but it actually started as kind of a joke based on a dare from a Finnish woman of all people, and not, for those of you who know that some Finnish people have Swedish as their native language, not a Swedish Finnish woman, like a Finnish woman. But she like stayed with us, my wife and I, for a couple of days. And I forget how it came out, but I was sort of interested in lots of Nordic things at the time. I was watching that like quite well-known series, The Bridge, from Denmark and Sweden. And I was watching some other Nordic stuff as well. And I was asking her heaps of questions. And at some point it came out that Finnish people are made to learn Swedish at school. And I said, well, like, given how hard a language Finnish is, you probably find Swedish quite easy. And I don't know, at some point she basically dared me to learn it. Not that she found it hard, it just became a thing. Like she invited us over to Finland at some point. Like she said, I've stayed with you guys for like a week now, so you should come over and stay with us. And we sort of made the decision that we were going to go. We didn't know how we were going to do that with money and stuff. And that still hasn't even happened. But because I had the time, because it wasn't like we were going next week, I decided I would try and learn Swedish. Now I chose Swedish because it's kind of like the capital of the Nordic countries. It's got the biggest population,
right.
and Swedish and Norwegian are mutually intelligible to an extent. Danish is as well, whereas Finnish is just Finnish. Like, you learn Finnish, you can only communicate with Finnish people.
Right.
So that's why I chose Swedish. And I remember at some point she like kind of joked about how bad my Swedish was, because I said, hey, I'm learning it. Like, how good is yours these days? Because I know you haven't spoken it for a while. And she was like, well, I know it's better than yours,
Right.
which was completely true. But that just woke the competitive side of me. I was like, well, let's just see about that then. And I just started learning it like ridiculously intensely. I mean, not really, actually, not by like, say, Matt standards. If you know about that versus Japan story from when he was a teenager, I didn't actually learn it that intensely compared to that, but I spent a lot of time on it.
Right.
And really, I was actually interested in this whole sort of newer process of language learning. It's not actually newer, but it was new to me. Like, that is the non-school approach. So just jumping in and speaking, as opposed to like learning grammar and
Right.
and so that's what really kind of got me, and that went well with Swedish because Swedish is pretty easy at the base level. Like, there are very few grammar rules you have to remember, and so you can just kind of dive into it head first, and it sort of works in that way. So just the two things kind of went together. But after not that long, like a year or so, I started getting pretty bored because it started getting hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I took up French, and that was like all fun and games at the beginning as well, because that's also quite easy at the beginning. And so now I have those two at kind of a reasonable level, and I'm sort of trying to work out exactly how I'm going to go the next step.
Nice. Do you spend time? I know that in a video that you had said you don't specifically say, "Hey, I'm doing this day and this day" in terms of your languages, but do you try to put a little bit of time into each language each day, or is it just kind of how the cards fall?
No, I generally try to. Actually, this has very recently changed for me, and people who watch my stuff don't even know this because I haven't said it. But I've actually recently decided that I'm putting French on hold. It's at a level that I'm comfortable. It's not dropping off too quickly, and it's very similar to English, so it's not like the vocab isn't going to drop off at too high a rate. So I'm putting French on hold because I've decided that I want a very high level of fluency in Swedish, and so I'm just going. But before that, what I was doing I'd be spending about a week kind of in each, where I'd try and do a few hours a day of whatever that week's language was.
Right. Okay. When you went from Swedish to French, did the verb conjugations mess with you like a whole lot? Like the idea of having to conjugate. I know in Swedish there are verb conjugations, but there's like you use the same conjugation, don't you, for each like pronoun and stuff versus in French. Did that mess with you at all?
Not really, because I mean we do have them to an extent in English.
Right.
And I did do German at school, so that they have them more so than English as well. So it's not like I was unfamiliar with the idea of them. But also maybe the method had something to do with that. So I got into French again, sort of by accident, which was just that I was going to see if the Michel Thomas method was any good. And so long, it's sort of a boring story as to why. But I was testing the Michel Thomas method, and I just had it on my headphones while I was running, like exercising.
Okay.
And it's pretty effective for those base stages of a language. So it turned out that just as I was running and like the hours built up of listening to this method, and it sort of after a while I felt like I should take a French lesson on italki. But he's got quite a good method for going through the conjugations. So I don't think I would say that was really a problem.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that doesn't sound too bad. Swedish is why I found your channel. Oops, forgot to mute my Facebook. Sorry about that. I don't know if you heard that or not, but Swedish is where I found your channel. And Swedish has always interested me, just because of kind of that similar. It's similar to English in a sense as if it's not like Chinese or Japanese or anything. And I always like the idea of like I felt like you could get more bang for your buck out of Swedish because of the Norwegian and Danish ties as well. What
Yeah.
was when you first got into Swedish? What was like some of the media and stuff that you were watching, or what was or were you doing like an immersion? I hate to say immersion in the sense that we say it now, but like were you doing like native material at the time?
No, not really. Wait. Yes and no. I actually used a lot of Duolingo for my Swedish, which is kind of a bit of a dark secret of mine because, I mean, I've got a video about it on my channel, so it's not that dark. But now I kind of rag on Duolingo fairly frequently. But I was doing a lot of Duolingo, and I was doing things like just random things that probably weren't that helpful, like going to finding like blurbs for books that I might want to read and reading that like out loud as best I could. I did it with a native speaker like there with me, but then I would just do it myself, which is kind of a waste of time because you don't actually know what you're pronouncing wrong and stuff. But even today, I feel like that gave me some kind of understanding of certain aspects of it, of certain ways they construct phrases and stuff. And I probably should do more of that because it would be much more helpful now. But I was watching The Bridge at the time anyway with my wife, but
Right.
obviously we have subtitles on for that. And I remember my first kind of moment of like, okay, I have learnt something about this language. This is fairly early on, was being able to pick who was speaking Swedish and who was speaking Danish in that show, which now is like, oh my goodness, like the difference is ridiculous. There's no way I would ever not know.
Right.
But back then, like certainly still now, my wife has no idea because it all just sounds like gibberish to her.
Right.
And I also found a channel which no longer exists, sadly. Like it's still there, but there's no new content on it, called Clara Henry, who's just this Swedish vlogger, and she has English subtitles because I guess she worked out that some of her audience were English speakers, but she speaks very natural Swedish in that, like she doesn't like present herself. She's just talking.
Gotcha.
Very fast as well. Even today, I actually struggle to understand her.
Whoa.
And very like she uses sort of a lot of expressions, figures of speech. But that's kind of that's what I associate. In fact, if I ever need to get in a Swedish mind frame after doing some French or something for some reason, I basically just need to picture her face. And that's what I associate with my early studies of Swedish.
Oh, okay. I know that in terms of Swedish, it seems like they have a pretty solid amount of content that's really, because I think isn't like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and stuff, wasn't that guy Swedish? Wasn't that originally like a Swedish?
Yeah.
So,
If we're talking about written content, yeah, they're some of the most prolific writers of books in the world. And it is that, and then there's a few movies and stuff. Probably nothing compared to like one of the really large population countries. Like I wouldn't say there's anywhere near the same level of Spanish or French, but there's certainly enough.
yeah, it seems like they do a pretty decent job. That's what I always talk about with my Japanese, is that like I feel fortunate that Japanese is what I want to learn, because it's almost impossible not to stumble into Japanese content because they just produce so much. But I thought the same about French Swedish, in terms of like for them to be a smaller country, they do produce more content than some countries probably that are bigger than them.
Yeah. Yes, that is definitely true.
I have there's a question on the side here. Is it true that you can be fluent in Swedish in 6 months as a native English speaker?
I would say that yes, that statement is almost always true, given some extraordinary things. So if you were mixing with Swedish speakers, or at least doing, if you were doing something like the mass immersion approach at kind of 5 to 6 hours a day, and it would probably help if you were doing SRS on and being quite diligent with like okay, I didn't understand that sentence, I didn't understand that word, putting it in your SRS and building that in, and then listening to that same content again, and then at least every week having a conversation with a native speaker. But it would probably be even easier to motivate yourself if you're doing it every couple of days as opposed to every week. And then even if we do all that, if we then include fluent, if we count fluent as conversational like I am now, but not proficient, then yes. So like I'm very fluent in Swedish in one way, in that I could do an interview like this in Swedish and it would not be nearly as comfortable to watch, and it wouldn't be nearly as comfortable for me. It would be slower, all these things, but I could talk about the sort of stuff that I'm talking about now with you. If you could, yes, you could definitely get to my level of Swedish in 6 months if you put in, I would say, at least 4 hours a day on a good method. So yes, that's probably true in a way.
Yeah, I think that stems from a lot of it, because I think, not to obviously pop into this, but like, I think a lot of people see this 5 minutes a day to fluency thing from Duolingo, and so they're like, 5 minutes a day in 6 months, can I get there? I'm not saying this in particular person thinks that, but
yeah,
it's definitely, you've got to put your time in it. 5 minutes a day is nothing in the grand scheme of anything.
No, yeah. But if we're talking about, it's I always wrestle with something in my head as to whether French or Swedish is harder. Now, they're both extremely easy languages on the scale of like hard languages to difficult languages. I haven't looked at every language in the world, but I would not be surprised at all if they were the two easiest languages for native English speakers. But I always feel like at my kind of level, so a little bit higher, like B2 and trying to reach C1 in Swedish, Swedish is actually harder because the accent is harder. They have, people talk about like pitch accent. I kind of feel like every language has a certain pitch accent. Like if I were to mess up my tones now in English, it would sound weird. But they have a little bit more of a specific kind of thing where they're like, no, because you said that actually means a different thing. It's, what was I saying? The accent, the accent is hard, and like even like my accent is not perfect, and I'm trying to make it better. So there's a very big difference between fluency and proficiency.
Right. That's a very, very, very good point. And I think a lot of it too, I don't know if, and I'll see if you agree with this or not, but I think what can make it easier too is to get under your belt, like learn stuff that you care about, right? Like for me, for example, I'm not going to learn the vocabulary. I think I said this even in the stream I did yesterday, but I'm not going to learn the vocabulary for like a car engine, because that doesn't interest me in English, so I can't imagine it's going to interest me in my target language. So like, learn, if you like movies, learn about movies or whatever. And because once you get a feel for the language and once you become more exposed to it, it'll be easier to pick up at least vocabulary anyway.
I'm starting to come across to that side of things. Initially, I deliberately avoided content that I knew that I liked, which sounds so weird, but it's the same as I feel about music. So for those of you who haven't seen any of my stuff, I'm really into music. I did music at university. And there's certain music, like quite a lot of certain things for me, certain songs and pieces of music, classical pieces, that I will only listen to like on a hi-fi system, turned up with no one else home, kind of thing, because like I'm just not going to kind of ruin that song for myself by listening to it on repeat on like little earbuds or whatever.
Right. Okay.
and I felt a little bit the same way about certain content that I liked. Felt like there's this French movie that I really like. Well, it's like one of my top 5, called A Very Long Engagement in English. It's actually called Un long dimanche de fiançailles, which is actually means the long Sunday of engagement. And it's just a gorgeous film. And at first I was like, okay, if I'm going to learn French, I need to get it to a very high level before I'm going to watch that movie without subtitles, because I don't want to kind of use up the movie for myself. But now I see it as like, well, actually, when you watch something in a language you don't fully understand, or listen to something, or even read something, it's like you're peeling back layers slowly. So learning French has actually helped me see that movie many, many more times, or like I said, like 3 or 4 more times on top of all the times that I watched it with subtitles before I learnt any French at all. And I was able to watch it and be like, oh, that's interesting that she says that there. I would never have thought that. Like, the subtitles don't even acknowledge that line's there. So it's like I was able to do it, discover it from afresh all over again, because that
makes sense. That makes sense a lot. Let me see. There's a couple more things that came through on the side. I'm just gonna address it. Thanks for this. My pleasure. How many I'm actually glad that this is a question, because I was going to ask you, because I know that the SRS system is something you're more so recently getting into. But this person says, how many vocabulary words do you learn per day, and could you please explain your methods, and how do you go about choosing adequate reading material? Okay. Well, there's multiple questions. We'll get into the first part first. Vocabulary words, and I'm glad that they brought this up, because I know that SRS is something that you're newly getting into. So I presume the way that you learned vocabulary before recently, was it just literally just absorbing the words?
Yeah, which works to an extent, but it takes a very long time to build up a proper vocabulary, which is why I've been moving towards SRS. So to answer the how many words, I haven't really been keeping track of that in Anki. Certainly a lot more than, like, so Matt said 10 a day. Matt has said in his interview with Ollie Richards that he was able to keep up 10 a day for like a long time, which is a lot if you keep that up, as he said. I'm in a much easier language, and certain things about the word indicate what it is already. Like, there's like parts of the word that you can see that so, like, gearbox is just the word for gear and the word for box. Like,
right.
Or no, it's actually the word for change and then box. So, like, it's different, but it's a shift box, right? So I'm just punching them in as I feel motivated to. Like, I'll punch in a whole heap, like maybe 100, and then I'll wait until I feel like the intervals are getting too big on Anki, and my reps, as they call them, are going down to the point that it's like less than kind of 15 minutes a day, and then I'm like, okay, so I need some more new vocabulary in there, because it looks like I've jetted most stuff into like the 20-day kind of mark, so I'm going to run out soon. So I think it's actually, since I started doing it, which is maybe 15 to 20 days ago, I'm probably going at about 20 words per day.
Nice. Do you pull that vocabulary from while you're watching or reading, like watching TV or reading books, or do you have like a preset vocabulary list that you are pulling from?
No, I'm pulling from the book that I'm reading, which I'm kind of reading repetitively. So as in, I'm reading like I'm reading about like 5 chapters, and then I'll go back to chapter 3 and read from chapter 3 up to chapter 8, and then I'll go back to chapter 6 and read from chapter 6 up to chapter 10. And so I'm getting all the chapters at least twice, if not 3 times. And along with the SRS, it means that there's a lot of words that I'm like, oh yeah, yes, that makes sense that it's used there. So it's kind of making sure that I am being exposed to it in its in the setting that I got it from.
Yeah, then that's I'm glad that you said that too. That's the way that I'm getting vocabulary in my Japanese is through. So like normally I don't like learning, especially for a language like Japanese or something. I don't like to learn single word vocabulary words, but
Yep.
I'm pulling vocabulary from videos I'm watching, and I'll do single word vocabulary words because it's from something that I know the context of.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I also do have a few sentences, but that's when I find I only do that when I find a really good sentence that has like 3 or 4 things that I want to take note of. Then I'll put that sentence in, and I'll like kind of use the Anki formatting, like the italics and bold and underline and whatever, just to kind of draw my attention to those things. And what I'll do with that is actually, even if I remembered the answer, I will give that a fail so that I see it again soon, because it's actually just to remind me of that sentence and that construction and everything.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
Let me see. How do you go about okay, this is a good question, I guess, and especially from a beginning stage too. How do you go about choosing adequate reading material?
Adequate, I'm assuming, meaning
Probably like to
appropriate.
The level.
Yeah, that's actually really hard. I stuffed this up massively when I kind of about a year into Swedish. I was like, you get that feeling of like cockiness of like, yeah, like I've got this thing pretty down kind of thing. That's how Matt put it anyway. Like I think he said after about 2 or 3 years of Japanese, he was like, yeah, I'm pretty sweet at this. And I ordered just some books that I thought would be interesting, and some of them in particular were way too hard. But so that was just the preface to say that I haven't always gotten this right. I sort of feel like if there's something you really want to read, and it's only like it's not too far above your level, then you can just kind of make it work. It sort of depends on your tolerance for repetition, and again, as Matt puts it, your tolerance for ambiguity. So like when you don't understand what stuff means, and just being okay with that. So this is one of the huge advantages that kids have. Kids don't understand what anything means to an extent. Like even when they watch like Toy Story at 4 years old, there's so much stuff in Toy Story that they would have no idea about.
Right.
But they watch it like 15 million times.
Yeah.
And then, suddenly they know what is it, like Star Command, and like, the air here seems breathable. And like, why is a 4-year-old learning that? It's like, well, because they can. So if you can just, I don't think there's really such a thing as adequate reading material if you're interested in it, and if you can tolerate it being difficult and not really comprehensible. But I think you just have to give it a try. So if you're looking at ebooks, for example, normally you can sample like a couple of pages or something. And if you can roughly work out what's happening in the first couple of pages, then there's a very good chance you'll be able to understand the whole book.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have, does Amazon have, because I know in Japanese, in order to get Japanese books, you have to make an Amazon.jp account, and like you have to have a whole new email for it. It's like a whole big to do. Have you bought like Kindle books through Amazon? Or do you have to have like an Amazon suite like Sweden or
no, I don't think so. But I'm not an expert on Amazon, and Amazon in Australia is quite clunky. So when you say there's a whole to-do list for getting an Amazon.jp, it's actually kind of the same in Australia. And if you set it up wrong from the beginning, you can get yourself to the stage that I've gotten myself to, which is like, I can't even be bothered buying stuff from Amazon anymore. It's just too difficult.
I heard you say that in the was it
on the live stream?
On the live stream, you were talking about Amazon being not good in Australia.
Yeah, it's because they have like if you've originally had an Amazon.com account and then you try buying stuff, it like sort of works out that you have this ghost account thing. It's got like this like Australian account, and so now my Kindle is telling me that I tried to buy one of Ollie Richards' books, so his dialogues in intermediate French, and it keeps sending me this thing saying that my my credit card details are wrong, and I'm like, yeah, I've updated them, but it's updated, I think, on the American one, but it won't let me update them on the. It's just a
Whoa.
nightmare. So as for Swedish books, I've only ever gotten them from Bokus.com, so that's Bokus.com, which you can set that site to English if you want. Like you can set so that the site language is English, but it is a Swedish bookshop, and I just for ebooks I just buy them from there in EPUB format and then convert them for Kindle.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of by these days standards, it's a roundabout, annoying way of doing it, but it's less annoying than
Yeah,
dealing
I
with
was gonna.
Amazon.
It sounds like it's less annoying than Amazon.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and the third question was, what are your favorite books? I don't know if in particular they're speaking Swedish or French or just overall in general, but however you want to interpret that. What are some of
Mm.
your favorite books?
Yeah, so I can kind of answer for both Swedish and English. Um, One of the best thrillers, if you want to call it that, that I've ever read is by Peter May, who's a Scottish author, and it's called The Black House, and it's actually part of a trilogy called the Lewis Trilogy. And I decided at the end of last year that I was spending way too much time reading in English because I like to read. But I was doing it so much that it was kind of taking away from time that I felt like I should have been spending on language learning. So
Gotcha.
then I was like, well, there's a lot more Peter May books that I would like to read, but I don't want to spend time reading in English. So I've got quite a few of them. I think I own 4 of them, like the actual paperbacks in Swedish, because thankfully they have been translated. So that's the one I said before that I'm reading like 5 chapters and then going back, and
Yeah.
that's one called Coffin Road by Peter May. I'm really enjoying that. And it's sort of like there's some relationship there in that Scotland has quite a lot of Scandinavian heritage. That's where they get the crazy accent. It's part of it anyway. Other favorite books. I have never read through a native speaker book in French.
Okay.
I read so that people know that I'm not just saying it for Ollie's sake, or like that. So that people know that Ollie just doesn't say it so that he can sell more books. I read his intermediate dialogues in French.
Uh huh.
That's really good, actually.
Really?
And yeah, so he's actually like he goes out of his way to make sure the stories are interesting.
Okay.
But
Cool.
and he's very good at knowing. Like he worked with a French translator, so he writes it in English, and then I'm pretty sure they translate it, and he works with them. But at the end of each chapter, which is one of the dialogues are very short. They're like a page long, like a short page, and then at the end of each dialogue, which counts as a chapter, there'll be like 5 or 6 phrases or words that you probably don't know if you're only an intermediate
Ah.
speaker. And yeah, he's got a bunch of them. Like he must find all these translators, because he's got like short stories for beginners in Icelandic, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a Spanish and Russian one.
Hmm.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
puts he pumps them out. I think he's doing. I don't know if
yeah,
it's out yet. I know he's doing a Japanese one too.
yeah,
So, let me see. There are a couple more questions here, but
yeah,
I'm gonna kind of break it up. I'll do a little bit from the chat, and then I'll have a question. Also,
yeah.
Emmanuel Macron says, Bonjour, monsieur. Don't kill my pronunciation there, but
No, that's all right. Bonjour, Emmanuel.
Come to Japan, Dan, and language come up. I'll get your questions in just a second. I want to know. This is a random question, but I was thinking about this earlier. Like in America, there's this like you're in the minority if you're a language learner because there's in America this idea of English. English is spoken everywhere, so there's no reason for me to learn a language. If I go to another country, they're going to speak English. What is the language kind of, I don't want to say language learning community in a sense of like, oh, we're doing YouTube videos, but like what is kind of the overall thoughts on that? Do Australians have kind of a similar aspect, or are they, because I know Australia is like way closer to a bunch of other countries than America is. Like we're kind of on our own outside of like Mexico, but like, you know, like Europe is so far across, but like Australia, I don't know. You guys are kind of by yourself too, though.
Yeah, like at first when you said that, I was like, "What? No way! You guys have Mexico and South America like right there."
Yeah.
So we have like China and Indonesia not too far away. But no, I've never. Well, I have been to America, but when I was like almost a baby. And my sister lives there. She basically is American. She grew up there.
Whoa.
But I think Australia is, if it's about the same, if not possibly worse, because from what I can see of general English-speaking America, there's some kind of familiarity with at least the idea that one might learn Spanish.
Yeah.
Like maybe not, they don't actually speak Spanish outside of like hola, but there's at least the idea that like I live not that far from Mexico and a lot of Americans learn that not, you know, a comparatively high amount of Americans learn some Spanish,
right?
At least. Whereas in Australia, language at school it's done, but it's totally random depending on like the language that of a teacher that your school can get.
Whoa.
Like so like my high school, which was a private school, so like a fancy one, it offered German, Japanese and French, but that's just because we had a German, a Japanese and a French teacher. You go to a high school like literally across the road and they might offer Chinese and Arabic. Or like that doesn't mean you can't do it in the higher levels of high school. Like the last couple of years, you can choose another one and do it by like correspondence or, you know, by distance.
Yeah.
But you generally just do a language that your school offers, but you don't have to do a language at all. It's just like taking music or art. Like you don't have to do it in high levels of school. And yeah, in primary schools, it's probably the most common one these days is Chinese. But that's like, they'll literally teach you like ni hao kind of thing.
Right.
Like, you know, it's primary school. And then for adults, like, so we're talking like white Australian adults, I don't know what the percentage is of people who can actually speak another language to a decent level, but it would be very, very low.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know if it'd be similar or not. Yeah. For some reason, I was thinking. I mean, I know where Australia is. Like, I'm not the best geographically, but like I'm pretty solid just because of interest in languages. And like, as soon as I started talking, I was like, no, I guess Australia actually is pretty much just by itself. Like,
yeah.
So.
And it's just that, well, like it's becoming a little bit, the reason that a little bit of Chinese is coming in is just because of all our trade with them and how many Chinese people are coming here. But so it's not really to do with geography. It's more to do with the amount of Chinese immigrants we have. And there are little spots in Sydney and Melbourne and even the smaller cities like mine, like little kind of areas that are like unofficial Chinatowns, where where the English spoken is very broken and hard to understand, and it would be easier to function in those places if you spoke Chinese.
Wow.
So they're like little communities where there's all just Chinese speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the Chinatown, just like New York has, and a couple other places. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Come to Japan, Dan says, do you have any techniques to practice thinking in the target language? I find many practice the main skills, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, but not necessarily exclusively thinking practice. I've never even thought about that, but that's an interesting question.
Okay, so I guess so he seems to be asking about, like, as opposed to when I'm trying to speak the language, can I switch my thoughts so that they're coming directly in that language? He's opposed to, like, just as I go about my day.
Right.
That is really hard. I've tried to do that when running sometimes, and the most successful times have been just when I've had the most of the language input before. So if I've just been doing like 3 hours of Swedish or something, which is pretty rare that I do that and then go for a run. But if I have, so lately I've been doing the most Swedish that I've ever done all at once, and I do find that sometimes thoughts are just coming to me as I run, because that's just like clear thinking time. Thoughts will just pop into my head in Swedish, but they're very broken thoughts, I want to point out. So like they'll be like, look, there goes en bil, which is a car. Like it'll be like, half in English, and I'll see something and the word for that will be the first thing that comes into my head, rather than I'm not like thinking there, sitting going, ja, så nu ska jag tänka på svenska. Och det. It's not like that. It's just like random little, titta en hund, look, there's a dog kind of thing. Like,
Gotcha.
Yeah. My answer to that is lots of input. Lots of input, all, and clump it as much as you can. Like, as in, don't clump your whole week's input into one day, but the more of it you can do at once in a day, and then try to have some time thinking.
Okay, yeah, because all the input, I guess, it's almost like it would switch your brain over. Like your brain is getting all that, so you're.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying in that, like if you're looking around and you're just like, oh, there is a, and then you would say the word for picture, like almost that, kind of just like a word. I used to do a thing when I was learning Spanish, and I don't know if this is frowned upon or not, but it was okay for me. But like, I would speak to friends who knew Spanish, and I said, hey, every word that I know in Spanish, I'm going to type in Spanish, and the rest of the sentence will be in English, which I don't know if that's a good idea or not, because the grammar is a little bit differently. But I would be like, oh, today, or, like, today I went to the store, and I would have today, and then I went, but then in store, like, and that's, I would do that kind of thing.
Yep. I don't know whether that's frowned upon or not either, but like, so I want to say, if I didn't make it clear before, that is happening by accident. It's not as if I'm trying to think about, like, there goes some people with a baby. I'm not trying to think about that in Swedish. It just sometimes happens, but it'll happen only when I've been doing a lot. And I don't think it can. I don't think you can force it. I don't think it can happen before you're at a reasonably high level, because there's just way too much English in your brain that's just going to overpower the other language. Like, even now for me, my English is at least twice as good, if not 3 times as good as my Swedish. So like, it's just going to be that thing. It's like someone hands you something to the center of your body, you're just going to take it with your good hand.
Yeah.
Like, it's just going to have, and you could tell your body not to do that, but it's much harder to tell your brain not to think in your native language. So I think unfortunately, the answer is to be better at your target language.
Yeah. And you're right about that. I mean, because I think about like I'm 32. My brain has had 32 years of English input, so it's going to be so hard not to think in that. I know that, I don't know if you have watched Otaku with Dave. His name is Dave. He does like the mass immersion approach, and he'll make updates. But at the end of his 1-year thing, someone was asking him about what he could output, and he said, I haven't output anything, like, it's not been my focus. My focus has been input. He said, but to try and answer your question, if I see something sometimes from where I have had so much input, it will come to me faster in Japanese.
Yes, yes. And that's the same for me. So like there are various phrases or like little bits of vocabulary that the book I'm reading at the moment will use a lot because the book is about that thing. And it will genuinely be like I'm talking to my family and I just hesitate. And I don't want to be that guy who says like, oh, well, the Swedish word for it is this, because like no one cares.
Right.
But I do, there are times that I hesitate and I'm like, you know, bordet door, the table. Like I don't actually say it, but I my brain does kind of go, that thing, bordet, the
Yeah.
table is what I mean. So it's like I almost have to translate it back.
Yeah. I've seen several examples. I haven't done that myself, but I've seen several examples. Like people that I know who know. I have a friend that knows Japanese, and like and he lives in Japan as well right now. And like he'll be like the thing, man, and he'll have to explain it. And I'll be like, oh, you mean the cup? And he's like, yes, cup. Why could I not think of it? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, go
on. My train of thought just
Sorry, I thought you were going to go to another question.
No. Well, I was gonna go into So another thing I wanted to talk about is actually I think it is one of your more recent videos, I believe, but it's talking about, you talked about motivation and some stuff like that. But one thing that I took away from that that I actually found very interesting, and it's something that I've never really seen anybody touch on, because everybody's like, no, learn at your own time, learn whenever, And in that video, you actually make a counter argument to the first 4 hours that you're up is the most productive that your brain is, or like it's kind of a time period where you're, I guess, the most alert. And so you actually went into how it would be a good idea to wake up a little bit early instead of having your most productive hours like the first thing you're doing going to work. It's kind of in that time, and I actually found that very interesting because that's not something that a lot of people talk about, because they're just like, no, study whenever, right? If you're falling asleep, throw a flashcard on, and you're like, hey, get the most out of your brain. And I thought that was very, I actually went and picked up that book you were talking about, the 1 hour or the one thing. And I started listening to the audiobook of that, and which is fantastic. It's a 5 hour audiobook. I'm an hour in, but it's fantastic so far. But is that something like, do you, I mean, I know that you, I guess, do to an extent, but how much of that do you implement in terms of like setting an alarm, getting up, and like how have you altered your sleep schedule just in terms of waking up early to get in some study and then just going to bed early versus just doing it late at night?
I do like struggle with sleep. Like I can get into a good rhythm, and very little things will throw me off. So even like, but I've basically had to only ever drink coffee in the morning, like, and even like first thing in the morning or close to it, because otherwise, even like later in the day, it affects me for quite a long time. And if like sometimes when I'm tempted to have a second coffee, I'm like, this will be like a week of paying for this, where I can't get my sleep back into rhythm. So I'm not always perfect at kind of what I'm about to say, but for me lately with this whole isolation period thing, it's looked like it's looked like doing kind of an hour of language stuff before my son starts school, which is like obviously homeschool. Because like it's not that he needs like heaps of supervision or whatever, but just that like interruptions can happen when he's doing homeschool. Right. So it's really just in terms of alarms and stuff. There were some periods of time when I am working, which I'm not at the moment because of isolation again. It's sometimes looked like setting an alarm for really early, and yeah. So I kind of I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's basically just when I realized that within 20 minutes of waking up, I'd be like drinking my coffee and on the road to work. And yes, I could listen to something if the trip to work was long, because I work in different places. I could listen to like podcasts or whatever. But even then, I was like, this is pretty passive, as opposed to like getting up and reading with an audiobook and like underlining words and stuff. I really felt like my most alert time was then, and I started setting an alarm for like quite early to do an hour before I got to work, because then, and I know my bosses are never going to see this, but like I don't really care if I'm starting to drift off a bit when I'm at work. It doesn't matter. But it does matter if I'm doing it while I'm. Yeah.
In terms of your immersion and stuff, or again, I've gotten to this habit of saying immersion, and I don't like when you're using native material, because I know not everybody is an MIA or here, but like, do you find, especially for that time in the morning, do you find that what is more beneficial to you? Do you find it reading, or do you find it watching like native content, TV show, YouTube videos, or whatever?
Even though like it's what do you call it? It's target language stuff, so it's going to be mentally more difficult than anything in English. There's still just some part of me that, rightly or wrongly, thinks that it's bad to wake up and watch TV. Okay. So, like, as in, I just feel weird about that.
Sure.
Even though I probably did that a lot when I was in my 20s, but oh no, not really, but maybe as a teenager. So I generally read, and I like to read with audiobooks, like, so reading along with the audiobook.
Yeah.
Because that gives me the visual and the audio. It makes me able to, like, when they say stuff that I'm like, what? I can actually see it there on the page. But it also, the main advantage I find is that it just gives my brain less, like, avenues to wander off.
Right.
Because if I'm reading, we've all done that thing in English where we read and we're not actually reading. Our eyes are looking at the words, but we're not taking in what's said. That's probably even easier in a target language. But it just, so that's what I like. That's generally what I do first thing. And lately I've been doing that, and then my Anki. And then I might do some more reading if I feel like alert and I've got time in the day. Or if I don't have time, I then might wait till later on, like get my other stuff done that I need to throughout the day. And at night, I will watch something on Netflix or on YouTube. I actually find YouTube better, but it's not great for sleep because it's just like next thing. Like,
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. So reading is, I mean, it seems like reading is pretty widely. I know that I think even Matt talks about how reading is the better way to, like, immersion is there just for being able to get when people are talking to you. But I believe even Matt believes that, like, in terms of vocab picking up, like reading, because you're seeing it, you're visualizing, I mean, like, I get watching the TV shows, you have the context of what's happening in terms of that.
Yeah.
But as far as vocabulary picking up, seeing that word, it seems like it's pretty beneficial.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would probably just do that if I didn't see the massive danger with that, which is that, like, no matter how, and people say that people often like to pick the language that they're learning and say that, like, oh, well, spoken Spanish is very different from written Spanish, or spoken Portuguese is very different from written Portuguese, or whatever. I can't think of a language in which that isn't the case. Like, well, I have heard that it's kind of closer with Icelandic, but still, like, it's not just the fact that, so Matt talks about this, like, how you going, as opposed to how are you, or whatever that all have in a book, or how are you going. It's just like, how you doing, how you going. It's not just that. It's also the kinds of words used. Right. So spoken language, so this is why I think YouTube is good. Spoken language tends to repeat things a lot with just slight variations on what they're saying. So they'll say, so I was at, as I said, I was at this store and then they'll be like, so anyway, I'm in the store or I'm in the shop or whatever, and they've used like two different words for store or shop, but a book will just say, Jonathan went to the store to blah blah blah. It's the way the kinds of vocabulary and the things they say are very different. It's not just clearer, it's also it's just different. It's more technical. People won't generally describe like how mountains, like the clouds billowing off the top of the mountains kind of thing. Like the amount of times I've used the word billowing in my whole life is like maybe less than 1,000.
Oh, for sure.
But the amount of times I've seen it in a book is definitely more than that.
Right. That would be very odd if somebody spoke like that. I would be like, "What is wrong with you?"
Yeah. Well, and just every now and then, it's good when someone does have that kind of vocabulary, because sometimes people do need to describe, or they feel like they want to describe something quite complex, or like a picture, like, and you can sometimes tell when you're talking to someone who either has a way with words or is actually a writer. They will describe something that you were not there for, and you'll feel like you were there for it. And it can be done naturally, but even then, I would say that native speakers are aware that it's like, oh wow, that was a very good description. So like, but if you talked like that all the time, it would be weird. So I think that's why YouTube is important to. Otherwise, I would just read all the time because I prefer it. But YouTube, especially people who just talk to the camera, like, "Hey everybody, what's up? Wait, what was I going to talk about? This is now," kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what when I talked to Matt at the end of my first month of immersion with Japanese, I told him, I said I watched Netflix sometimes, I said, but I'm finding more enjoyment out of just YouTube videos, because that's literally how the language is, because it's not even, and I know that those scripts are fine and I enjoy the shows that I watch, but there's nothing more pure than like watching like someone do a let's play of a game and they're just literally reciting up. That's just as natural as it's going to get.
Yeah. Even PewDiePie, and I'm thinking about using this example in a video I might be doing down the track a little bit. About what it actually means to be a native speaker of something. I don't watch heaps of his stuff because he puts out something every day. I don't have time, but like, he played a really scary game like recently. He used to always play scary games, but he played one recently, and something popped out of nowhere when he wasn't expecting it. And like mid-sentence, he's speaking English, and he just stops and goes like, "Jävligt fittan," which is like a really heavy curse in Swedish. And it's like that at that moment, the only thing that popped into his head was something that he's probably learned as a teenager, kind of thing. Right. So it's very pure, like you say.
I find that to be, I don't know, there's just something about it. And picking up the patterns. And what I've noticed too is, you watch multiple people on there, you'll pick up they have different, like, people have different patterns of speech. So
yeah.
The other thing I was going to talk about, and I know that we had talked about this a little bit prior to the stream, and it actually makes sense, especially with you kind of quote unquote changing your mind about the SRS system in terms of using it. But you want to not dive into, but talk about just a little bit changing your mind in terms of language learning methods or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so something you said in one of your recent videos was that it's fine to change your mind if you don't feel like you have anything to connect to in the culture, or, if I would say definitely, I would agree with that. But I guess I would say, like, just before you switch, analyze your actual reasons for it and really be honest with yourself about why you're changing your mind. Because I won't go that way. If you're quitting because quitting that language or stopping that language because you are happy to admit that you don't really know why you started, and you realize that, like, You know, like maybe you started for a silly reason, which is that like maybe it was because someone told you it was an easy language, which is a lot of people take up a language because they're like, oh, I heard this was the easiest one.
Yeah.
If you realize that that wasn't a good reason for starting, and you'd much rather learn, say, Icelandic because you're really into like certain Icelandic music or something, and even though you've heard Icelandic's really hard, then definitely go for it. Learn Icelandic. That's going to work better for you. But if you're like, well, I do feel a connection to this culture and stuff, but right now I'm just really attracted to this other language, that might be more out of resistance to like it being difficult. So like I do remember, I think I got a little bit deep into the Swedish rabbit hole to ever think that I wasn't going to keep going with Swedish. But I do remember when I started with French, I was like, man, this is awesome. Like I'm making so much progress in this. I'm probably going to get better at French than I am at Swedish, kind of thing. And actually that's kind of true. I sort of almost did in some ways. But that was just resistance to like I had hit that kind of wall of about the B1 level where I was like, it now becomes very hard to progress, where it had been very easy to progress from A0 to B1.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would like people to actually work out if it's because they don't engage with the culture or if it's because they're just being lazy, basically.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that there is, I don't know, like, I'm in a spot where sometimes I think if I would sit down and think about it a little bit more before I would make the video, it could help. But I also understand that part of the lore of my channel is that it's non-scripted, like it's just go.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and it doesn't matter how much you think about what you're going to say. You will say things that you change your mind on. Like one of my first videos that had any kind of traction on YouTube, like it didn't do really well, but it's done better than some of my others, is basically saying that like Duolingo was good because it got me to a stage where I could then do other things. And I would still agree with that, except that at the time that I did most of my Duolingo, it was, I think it was a better program than it is today. So these days, a lot of, sorry?
They've removed so many features.
Yeah. And just change the formatting of it, that I think it's more geared towards making money, like keeping you on it for longer, not in an unnecessary way. And so I get a lot of comments on that video that are like, yeah, this is so true. I still use Duolingo. It's great and stuff. And I'm always like, I don't know that you should be. I don't agree with myself from a year ago.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that my biggest complaint with Duolingo is that you fail stuff, which mistakes aren't bad, but you fail. I get you have to have a system for this gamification, but they say, we don't want you to advance. We understand that language learning, you need to slow down, so you need to study this other stuff. And so I'm like, okay, I can agree with, I can give you $10 and pass. So like, I have a complete issue with that.
Yeah, I didn't even know that because I've never really used it on my phone, or not since like the back in the old days before it was that. But also just excessive repetition doesn't actually produce more fluency or more anything really. Like I think we have this idea that language learning is about memory. So if I tell you that the French for the apple is la pomme enough times, then eventually you will just know it. But it goes way overboard. And that's not gonna like then produce the fluency of like je mange la pomme, I eat the apple. It doesn't matter how well you know that the word for the apple is la pomme. If you still have to be prompted with the apple and then think la pomme, you're not going to be able to think je mange la pomme.
Yeah.
Even just me doing that, those 4 words has come from me speaking French, not from me learning French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes into a whole different category too of the idea of language learning versus language acquisition.
Mm.
Because there's, I know people who know languages, but they have to sit there and think, like, I mean, essentially translate it in their head and then
Yeah.
spout it out.
Well, yeah, Evan Edinger, I think is how you say his name. So he's like, his channel is about lots of things, but his most popular videos, I think, are about learning through Duolingo, and he like completed the German tree, which is insane because the German tree is huge. Like I think it's the biggest of all of them. But yeah, he did a live stream in German, and he had to speak so slowly. Well, and a lot of it wasn't in German. Like he would just say random words that he couldn't think of in English. But he had to speak so slowly that I could understand him just from like my school days German. And just from, it's like, well, you must be saying this, because I had so much time to think about it.
Right.
Yeah, so he can probably read quite okay, like depending on the level of material, but yeah.
And that actually goes into that goes into a good point as well. What like, because again, I know Matt's theory and stuff on speaking early versus not speaking early. How early do you think, like, when you okay, well, if you were to start learning French or Swedish now, knowing what you know in terms of language learning, when would you start speaking? Would you start speaking immediately, or would you give yourself a few months to kind of internalize what's happening and then go, or what would your process be?
Yeah, I think I would give myself a few months. So I've thought about this for whatever I want my next language to be, which, like, I'm really excited about, but at the same time, I kind of want to promise myself that it's not going to be until 2022, because I feel like that's as long as I will need to get to the levels that I'd be happy with in French and Swedish. But I think I'd give it at least probably 3 months. I think this is a thing, and I didn't actually dive as deep into it with Matt as I wanted to. There's the ideal way of doing something, and then there's what you can actually get yourself to do. So yeah, I want to make like a really in-depth video about this on my channel, but like yeah, because as Matt said in that video, it's no good having all the best techniques in the world if you can't actually motivate yourself to do them. I think now, knowing what I know and seeing the level that Matt got to in Japanese and everything, I think I'd be happy for 3 months. But like, that's not too long. I know like Lydia Machova, she says like for her it's 6 weeks. I've heard of, I think Luca Lampariello does about a year, but then he said that in Portuguese he waited way too long because he didn't actually need to, because he could basically internalize the language within a couple of months, because he was so fluent in Spanish, and Italian is his native language, and he also quite fluent in French as well. So I probably would give myself 3 months. I feel like that's. At the same time, I think that sometimes the mass immersion or like very high input level crowds don't acknowledge some of the benefits of speaking. So it's like, there are some things that no matter how many times you see them on the page and hear them, when you go to say it, you're going to say it in some weird English speaker way. Because your brain will be like, you know all these words, and if you put them in that order, it'll give you that meaning. And I like, because there's things I still say in Swedish that I'm like, I know that's not right, even as it comes out of my mouth. But I've found that the best way to correct those things is like every time you say it, you actually feel weird, and then straight away your tutor is like, this, I don't want to say it because it'd just be some random example, but like, you've got to remember you say this. And I think that speaking does that in a way that just input can't. So I think that balancing it from maybe 2 months, 3 months, I don't know. I think that there's a good idea of there's something to be said for balancing a lot of input with a little bit of output.
Yeah.
I don't think it's great to go like a year. I just don't. I think that that's going to be waiting too long before you start making mistakes that then might actually frustrate you because you're like, I should know this,
That's a
but
good point.
you're still going to do them. Like, yeah.
I found just in the past, I've found that in terms of remembering stuff, or I say remember when I'm talking about trying to internalize a language, but
Yeah.
in terms of getting stuff to stick, I found that just shadowing is for me anyway, is incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, because then you have that thing. I have also found that. So for anyone watching who's not familiar, basically I've recently sort of more switched to the input side. Like in Swedish and French, I spoke quite early and I was reasonably happy with my progress, but there's certain things that certainly neither of those languages are anywhere near like Matt's Japanese. Although having said that, I also haven't done either of them for nearly as long. But that's kind of where this is coming from. That I have now sort of switched over to an input method. But I also think that there are benefits to speaking, and I agree with you that there are benefits to shadowing and saying, like, especially when things feel wrong. So like whenever you have. I don't want to get too technical, but there's this like certain construction in Swedish that just feels very strange to a native English speaker, because it's the wrong way around as far as we're concerned. And yeah, just having to do it a lot has probably helped more than hearing it a lot, because when you hear it, you understand it. You're like, oh yeah, all those words are there. But when you go to say it, you always go to say it in the English speaker way. And so that shadowing thing of like, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. The example I always think of is Matt always talks about in Japanese, if you don't know where your phone is, in English we would say, do you know where my phone's at? In Japanese, they say, do you know my phone?
Right.
So
okay,
like,
yeah.
So, you know, and then it's just, it might even be hard to forget, but if you say that a couple of times, you know, you can kind of get
yeah.
into that thing. So,
Yep.
I want to be mindful of your time. I appreciate
That's all right.
you jumping on. I don't know if you've
Yep.
got some stuff to do, but I'm going to give the chat a little bit of time because I know there's a 15, 20-second delay or 30-second delay, whatever it is. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we'll start wrapping up, because that's one thing I am going to I'm really bad. I try to be mindful of people's time, and then I'll talk for 2 hours. So
yeah, no, well, like I feel like in some way I owe the YouTube language learning community like time for someone else's channel, because Matt was outrageously generous with his time for me. And actually, that what is not shown in the video is that after he kind of showed me some things about Anki, he got me to share my screen with him so he could actually directly change things himself, which I found really helpful, because I can't stand messing with Anki. It really annoys me.
I can't. He did the same thing for me, man. I couldn't. I was like, I can't deal with it, man. And he was like, what's going on? And I was like, I just hate this program. And he was like, share your screen. And I said, all right.
Yeah.
And he did. He walked through the whole add-ons and all that stuff, and got everything set up. And did he get yours set up to where you don't even click how much, you literally just have pass or fail on the bottom?
Yes. Well, I already had that actually, because I'd watched his video on that. But I had a couple of weird add-ons that were like messing with each other and making it really strange. And the other one I couldn't stand is I wanted like the whole I wanted like certain fonts and stuff, because I've got a 4K monitor, and it was appearing like the whole thing was appearing just tiny. And then when I made it full screen, it was just a full white screen with like tiny little text up the top. And I was like, I can't look at that for more than about 2 minutes. So we messed with the fonts and everything, which isn't actually that hard, but just having him hold my hand through it was good.
No, for sure. Well, another question that I can get into is in turn, I'm not going to ask you to necessarily expand on this. You just made a well, not just made. I think it might even be a month-ish old, but you made a
Yep.
video on 12 free
Yeah.
apps
Yeah.
in terms of language learning, which I actually really like the way that you started it, because you were like, I made a video last year and I said, here's 10 apps, and then guys were
Yeah.
like, these aren't free, and you were like, well, I didn't say that anywhere in the video, but
Yeah. Yeah.
in terms of Swedish and French, is there anything in particular outside of? I know that you're a Busu fan, which is not available for Swedish, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or you use Busu anyway.
I think it's good for certain levels. I think even like my French has moved past it. And having said that, like my French is not great, but I think it's great for beginners. Yep. So you're asking about free Swedish resources.
Swedish or French, or it doesn't have to be free. What what would you use, like, kind of on your everyday situation?
It's kind of like to get started.
Yeah, to get started.
Okay. Well, like it's probably quickest if people watch that video, and I'm not trying to like promote my channel. If it's just easiest. It's a whole produced video just for that. But there is one that I missed in there that does have Swedish, because I didn't know about it, and someone wrote to me in the comments, which was nice of them. What's it called? Readlang.com.
Okay.
So it's kind of like Link. Oh, it's quite a lot like Link actually, but in my opinion, much nicer looking and much easier to use, and a lot more. You can do a lot more with it for free. And then the paid version is only $5 a month, not. I think I think of it as $5 because it's $4 US, so it's actually like $6 for me. But I think it might be $4 US a month.
That's not bad.
No, it's $5 for 1 month and $4 if you pay for the whole year.
Gotcha.
It's like $48 US a year, and it's. I don't know. It's kind of hard to think about whether that would be good getting started. I feel like that would still be quite hard to get started. It really, again, it depends on your like tolerance for discomfort in the language. I do think, they do have some like very basic videos on there. There are even some like, I think they're actually, no, so there's this Swedish YouTuber who generally does her videos in English, but she's got a channel called like Easy Swedish or Slow Swedish or something. And she speaks outrageously slowly. And Readlang has the videos scripted, basically, and it traces the words along as like with highlights as she's saying them. And then you can click it. Yeah, it's really good. Really, the only reason that I don't use it now is that I don't need to. I can just go straight to my stuff. But I have thought about doing it. It's sort of dependent on the community within Readlang to make the transcripts for the videos, because someone actually has to check that they're right and everything. But if someone does that for higher level material, like full-on native material like we're doing now, then that would be really helpful too. And I think that kind of stuff exists for Swedish. Basically, go and have a look at that website. It's pretty good.
I might check that out, because I really like the way Fluent U is. And that sounds like Fluent U, only not $30 a month.
Okay, right. Yeah.
So that sounds interesting, because Fluent U is like that. It has the videos, the subtitles play along. You can actually even click on a word and add it to like a vocabulary bank and all that stuff. But
yes, you can also do that on Readlang. Yeah.
But Fluent U is $29.99 a month.
Yeah. Okay. Also, for those who are only interested in Swedish, the like official Swedish things like svt.com, I think it's svt.com.se maybe. If you Google SVT, which is like, I think it stands for like Sverige Television. That was terrible pronunciation. It's Swedish TV, basically. It's a website which is like their national free channel. But they have like the news in easy Swedish, so nyheter på lätt svenska. so not slow Swedish, just easy Swedish. So they like dumb down the news a little bit. And then they have like children's programs. And I think the site in general, like the government site, even has free Swedish learning resources because, they've got a lot of immigrants. So they have stuff to learn Swedish for free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I
Yep.
like some stuff like that. Eric Roberts, what's up? What's up, man? Welcome. Cool. So I was trying to think if there was anything else. I know that we talked a lot about Swedish and stuff, and
Yep.
Let's, for a brief minute, talk about some stuff for French as well, because I know French
Yep.
is probably one of the most common languages out there in terms of people trying to, like, YouTube-wise, trying to find what do I
Yep.
learn. So what
Yep.
content-wise, doesn't have to be application, because you do have an incredible video on apps, very well produced. There's some funny stuff in there too, like, so definitely go, and link to the channel is in the description box of this. So go watch the video on apps for learning, and it's all free apps on there. But in terms of French, like, what would? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say some of the ones in the video are technically not free, but I've sort of got tips in them, tips on the video of how you can get them for free, or so close to free that it's like basically the same.
Yeah, like the Mango languages with the library cards and stuff.
Yeah, and you can kind of hack the Pod 101 thing so that you can get it for $1 a month. You can get it for $1 for the first month. And then you can basically just, it's not even illegal. You can just download all the material in the first month. And I don't think you ever sign an agreement saying you're not going to do that. So
right. Yeah, I mean, it's there. So,
yeah.
But what else would you recommend? Just resources in general for French, perhaps content, series, movies, books, or anything of that nature. What would you recommend French-wise?
Yeah, so YouTube, Inner French, just punch in Inner French, INNER French. Probably people haven't gone very long learning French without discovering that channel. He's a super, he's like super good at what he does. I don't know if he's I was going to say he's a cool guy. I don't know if he's a cool guy, but he's good at what he does.
Right.
Speaks very slowly without being like stupid about it. Like he just speaks very clearly. All his videos are fully transcripted. He also links to his website, which is just innerfrench.com, that he has podcasts for free, also completely transcripted. So exactly what he says is actually typed out by him. It's not just, probably not typed out. He probably uses some kind of voice recognition, but it's checked so that it's not just some random.
Right.
He's got like 70 or 80 podcasts. They're excellent, and I feel like native English speakers will be able to get something out of it, even from like nothing, because once you learn, like, you probably learn 20 words in French, and some of it starts making sense.
Right.
Also YouTube, Français Authentique, so authentic French. He's up to 800,000 subscribers now. A little bit more advanced than the channel I just named, in that he speaks a little bit more naturally, but also like he's also got his own website and stuff. I don't know how much of his stuff is available for free, but I found that when I was immersing in French, I loved his channel. Again, it's for French learners, so it is entirely in French, but it's not very hard.
Yeah.
Beginner stuff, I don't really know, because I kind of went straight from Michelle Thomas, which is actually, if you get it at full price, it's really expensive, to like native speaker material, or at least advanced learner material. So I don't really know about beginner stuff. But if you're more just interested in immersing in native speaker material, the movie I mentioned before, A Very Long Engagement, or Un Long Dimanche de Fiançailles, gorgeous movie. It's by the director of Amelie, but it's not nearly as famous as Amelie. Um, I don't really know why. Maybe it just isn't as appealing to an English speaking audience, but it's totally different to Amelie. Don't go into it expecting Amelie. You'll be disappointed.
Right.
It's a gorgeous film. I don't. I think your French would have to be pretty good before you understood too much of it, but I don't know. That's also a book, so if you can get the book, if someone on your live stream with the guy who learns Norwegian and French, I don't remember his name.
Tyler from Tongue Tied Blog.
Okay, so Tyler, someone on that asked about series. I highly recommend Au Service de la France, which actually on Netflix in English, it's a very secret service, which anyone who knows any French will know that that's not what it was. It's in service to France. So it's about like the French version of the CIA in the 60s. And it's a comedy, but it's also a kind of espionage thing. It's really funny. And there's actually some French-speaking jokes in there because there are like American spies who come to France and make like classic English speaker errors. So that's really good. And yeah, I feel bad. I don't really know any kind of more beginner material, but I'm of the more like straight to native speaker content kind of school. Because there's also 10%, 10%, which in English has a different title. It's Call My Agent. That's very advanced. Like I struggle with that without subtitles. Because they just speak so fast. But I've heard it from Parisians that it's very Parisian. So it's like as in just the way they talk and the kind of the swearing that they use and stuff. And what else is there? There's one. I feel like there's one more series. Do I have it written down? That's fine. Yeah. Also, can I just plug my second channel for a second?
Yeah.
It's actually reviews of non-English language movies and series. Because initially on my channel I was doing that plus language learning stuff, and then the language learning stuff got a lot more traction, and so I started doing just that, and I started putting the reviews on a different channel. But like, so it's like way smaller in terms of subscribers, but it's actually just as like the videos on there are just as highly produced and everything. So if you're just looking for like stuff to watch on Netflix in various languages, I've got like reviews of Hebrew speaking series, French, Norwegian, Swedish. Do I have a German one on there yet? I don't know. Basically, anytime I watch a series that's not in English, which is quite often, I make a review of it. So that's called the Reykjavik review. So Reykjavik as in the capital of Iceland.
Yep. I remember right when I had stumbled on your channel, there was still a bunch of, or there was a ton of the reviews like that. Maybe that was how I don't remember how I stumbled on your. I'm pretty sure it was something due to looking up Swedish somehow or something. But But I remember seeing a ton of those too. So cool. Yep. Well, like I said, man, we're closing in on an hour and a half, and I'm gonna try to be mindful of your time. So thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
That's okay. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for people who were watching as well.
Yeah, and like I said, the link to his channel, and actually I'll put a link to your second channel. I'll put both links for your channels in the description box below, so that way anybody who wants to check those out, you can go and check those out. And cool. Like I said, I appreciate you for jumping on, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, all right, guys, I will see you all in the next stream.